Hi, everyone. I'm Carlota Pico from the Content Mix, and I'm excited to be here today with Robert Dekker, who is Chief Marketing Officer at CPIC and has over 28 years of experience in marketing and communications. Welcome, Robert, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm really glad to be here.
The pleasure is ours, Robert. Let's jump straight into the interview. To get this interview started off, I'd like to learn a little bit about your background, a bit about your company, and how you got into your current role.
Sure. Originally, I'm from the Netherlands, and I have originally always worked in what you could call product marketing and product management. But whilst progressing throughout my career, that was then combined with a bit of business development, a bit of brand marketing. And the last sort of 10 years, I've been in international and global, you could say, encompassing marketing roles, looking after all marketing facets, either of a company or a division. Originally, I was working very much in entertainment, so music and video industries, but later that was sort of expanded, and currently working for CPIC or CPIC Global, which is a global operating real estate investment companies which specializes in investment opportunities in Pakistan, particularly in projects which are linked to the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, which again is part of China's One Road, One Belt initiative. The reason why I joined my current company, CPIC, was they were looking for someone with a completely different background from anyone who's worked with the company before, someone who understands processes, integrated marketing, brand strategy. And because I was on the lookout for something completely different, and I'd never worked for, let's say, a relatively small company, bit of a startup, entrepreneurial atmosphere, working directly with the board and the owners, I thought this would just be a great addition to my experience. So I joined them about a year and a half ago.
What have been some of the biggest challenges that you've faced up until now, and also some of the biggest achievements?
Well, specifically looking at the current company when I'm working for, CPIC, I think the biggest challenge has been the integration of, let's call it, sales and marketing. Because when I joined, marketing was very much, oh, you need to generate new leads for us, and sales was there to capitalize on those leads. But clearly, in this day and age, marketing plays a much more bigger role in terms of qualifying or pre-qualifying leads, giving people the right information so that when the sales teams actually get to speak to people, they are already well informed and they have a kind of idea of what it is they're after. So you get much less cold calling situations. But that meant building trust, that meant building a way of collaboratively setting an integrated marketing and sales calendar, and getting involvement from the sales teams in terms of developing the right content, etc. And in terms of achievements, I'd say the biggest achievement we've had because of that was a reduction in the costs of acquiring new leads and better conversion rates in terms of getting those leads into purchasing customers.
Very interesting. I'm head of business development at Bear Content, so I'm very commercially focused. Yes, I do marketing, but I also do sales. And for me, everything that I do in marketing, well, the majority of the things that I do in marketing has to have a commercial result. So it's very interesting how yourself in a marketing role, you're measuring it to the cost of every lead, which is, I mean, very powerful, because at the end of the day, you don't have a company if you don't have money and if you're not making sales.
No, true, but I think the division between marketing and sales, generally speaking, has evaporated quite a lot, I'd say, over the last couple of years. That's due to how differently customers in general, even whether you're B2C or B2B customer, people inform themselves and want to know information because before they're ready to engage in a more sales-driven conversation. So you have to work much more hand in glove, if you wish, to get the right people in the right conversation at the right time.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely agree. You've been at CPIC for 1.5 years now and have already grown your marketing team from 7 to 13, almost doubled it. What
Yes.
questions did you consider when growing your team? And ultimately, what roles did you hire?
Roughly speaking, the kind of roles we were sort of investing in was either creating content,
Okay.
so whether it's copy or whether it is video, but also we invested in getting more out of our sales and marketing automation platforms. In our case, we use Salesforce, and particularly the marketing automation was something we wanted to invest more heavily in, because initially, of course, when you're a relatively startup company, you acquire your customers and you get your new leads. But then at some point, you need to make sure you have the right data, the right tools to properly lifecycle manage these leads you have in your database, because the database grows. But if you don't know what value there are or who the people are you still want to engage with and what kind of information they might be after, then a large database becomes kind of futile.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned a key word, which is content. It's no
Mhm.
secret that COVID-19 has heavily hit the real estate industry, unfortunately. How have you had to adapt your content in order to connect or better relate with your potential clients right now?
I would say in three different areas. The first one is because initially we relied quite heavily on, let's call it, sales events or investment seminars or face-to-face interactions and conversations. So we had to move that to a digital environment, but that also meant that we needed to give much more information upfront to potential customers. So where normally speaking, people would be willing to engage in a sales event or some kind of seminar with an open mind and just a slight inkling of what kind of information will be given to them. In a digital environment, that doesn't work. People really want to know, right, I'm going to dedicate some time having a conversation with this person, educate me up front. So we had to invest more in almost like sales brochures with quite a lot more background than we usually would give before we would engage in a sales conversation. But even before that, in terms of our, let's call it, brand engagement and initial lead generation, we also had to change tack a little bit, where before COVID-19, we were talking a lot about ourselves, why we're different from other players in the industry, why the product we have to offer is a premium product, but why you can trust us, etc., etc. Now it became clear that we needed to change the topic of conversation to get people interested in the first place. So we created a lot of content about or storylines or messaging, and it depends on the channel you're talking about, how in the last decennia, the real estate investment has always been a safe bet, regardless of whether you talk about the financial crises of 2008, 2009, or in the 70s or the 80s. If you look at the historic data, ultimately real estate has always been a good investment. So we felt it was important to point it out, to say to people, look, if you are in a situation that financially can afford it to invest, then real estate is still a much better investment than anything else, whether it's stocks, options, precious metals. Real estate is where it's at. The second talking point, and that's a little bit more specific to our developments, but still quite wide in its reach, is our developments are linked to the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, which in its sense is part of China's One Road, One Belt initiative. And irrespective of COVID, these projects will go ahead and will succeed. Too much money has already been spent. Too many countries are involved. The stakes are way too high for these projects not to deliver. Yes, COVID-19 will probably delay a few things, but we felt it's much more important to talk about how these projects are progressing, and they are progressing today as we speak. And because of the rules being more relaxed, more and more effort and money is being plowed into them. So it's also about reassuring people this is a safe bet. Anything related to the BRI and CPEC is a safe bet in its own right. So, in a nutshell, we're speaking more about the world in general in the area which we operate and much less about ourselves, because it is about creating trusts and giving people information which puts them in a position where they have the right knowledge to decide whether or not it's something they want to engage further with, rather than a much more sales-driven conversation.
Okay. Just for our audience, FYI, for their information, the Belt and Road Initiative is a global development strategy adopted by the Chinese government in 2013, and it involves 70 countries and international organizations, and its main goal is infrastructure development and investment across those participating countries.
Yes.
Referring to your response, I think it's good to give our audience some background information on why you think that initiative is still going to move forward despite the health crisis.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Wonderful. I do want to talk about social media because your numbers are quite impressive. Since in CPIC, before you joined CPIC, you had literally half the amount of engagement that CPIC is currently enjoying. So what that means is that you essentially doubled CPIC's social media reach and engagement. And so I want to ask you about the strategy that you used to generate leads or to attract more followers to your pages.
A couple of things. I think first and foremost, we applied more differentiating strategies across the various channels. I'm always a very strong believer that if you're going to use a social media channel, any social media channel, you have to know what it is that you're going to use it for, which ultimately means you have to understand what your audience is expecting you to use it for. And I don't like it when a company either blasts the same message over all the same social media channels, and I also certainly don't like it if it's too much sales driven or just pushing information out. Some channels are really great to engage with your customers in a way which allows them to interact with you and to ask questions. Other channels are much more suited to provide information so that if people want to read something, that they can do. Other channels are really good in increasing your reach because you put out information which is very easy to understand, very easy to share, and very easy for people to interact in such a way that it pushes your reach numbers up. So I think that's one thing we certainly did. The second thing, like I did, we invested in more and better content, and actually that allowed us to follow through in that strategy. The third thing we did, and that's something which actually had already started just before I joined, is because we are delivering projects which are around real estate investments in Pakistan. And we're not only selling to Pakistanis living overseas, but also to people who are generally interested in, let's say, real estate investments in emerging markets. We thought it was very important, particularly my boss, the CEO of the company, Zishan Shah, thought it was very important to try to portray a more accurate and up-to-date picture of Pakistan as it is today. I joined the company a year and a half ago with a certain view of what Pakistan was like, is like, and I had to adjust my point of view. And we've invested in quite a lot. I think at the moment 3 influencer trips to Pakistan to visit various areas of the country and to take that content here on the road. So we've had several road shows and showings of some short films we did, and even one of the showings was in the House of Parliament, to help people understand, look, the view, the perception you have of this country, and therefore also of its economy or of the real estate sector in general, is no longer accurate. And even people from Pakistani origin who've been living in this country for quite a long time had to come to us and say, I didn't know that my home country had changed so much, and quite often for the better. And it's that kind of content which is very engaging and sparks a lot of discussion, but also really has helped us to increase our reach numbers. But it's a bit of a gamble and quite a bit of an investment to do that.
I relate a lot to that response because in my former life, that's exactly what I used to do. I worked with governments from emerging markets and helped them to promote their investment opportunities overseas to a European audience and also North American audience. And a lot of times it was about re-educating the audience about the actual opportunities that lie on the ground versus their hesitation sometimes, because oftentimes in Western markets, the way that emerging markets are viewed are only for poor social economic reasons rather than the wealth of opportunities that lie in those markets. More than anything, because they just don't know about it.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, news portrays the sad part of life rather than the happy part of life and how well a country is doing in a certain region. So, yeah, it's all about re-educating and also informing. So, I definitely resonate with that.
Yeah, absolutely, because it's very easy to look at a country's past, and even in the case of Pakistan, its relative recent past in terms of democracy or to what extent there is any economic growth, or whether that economic growth is properly distributed amongst its people, how much red tape there is, you name it, all of those things. And yes, you can look at a country and say, okay, it's not as, let's call it, advanced, quote unquote, as some Western countries. On the other hand, if you look at the pace of change and the development and the opportunities which therefore arise in such a country, you get a sense of how it might look like in 5, 10, 20 years from now. And that's in essence what you're asking people to buy into, which is, don't look at yesterday or don't fix in what still could be improved today. Look at the trajectory this country is on and what's happening and where ultimately this will lead to.
Yeah. I mean, one of my first campaigns was in Ghana back in 2009, West Africa. And
Mm.
that campaign was published later on in the London Times. And we did zoom into the real estate industry because 2009 Ghana, real estate was actually quite affordable and it was an amazing investment. And it proved to be an incredible investment now in 2020. So those clients that bought property 10 years ago have seen a very good return on their investment. And in
Mhm.
our case, when it came to investment reports, what we were always trying to say is that a smart investment or an investment that's going to provide a very high ROI usually takes a lot of risk. But at the
Mhm.
same time, the compensation is going to be that much higher. Because if you're only investing in very, very secure traditional markets, that means that probably real estate is going to be really high as well. And there's not going to be a very big margin on the return. So,
Yeah. Yeah, so for us, it's to some extent saying, look, remember what Dubai was like 30 years ago. Remember what Singapore was like 50 years ago. Remember what Shenzhen was like 20 years ago. Now, look at the parallels with Guadar, which is the city which is at the center of CPEC and one of the real sort of pivotal points in the whole BRI project. There's no reason why this city, this region, this country couldn't be the next one in that sort of list of those countries.
yeah, it's funny that you mentioned Dubai because actually one of my most recent campaigns before joining Vera Content was about Sharjah, which is one of the
Mm.
Emirates in the UAE. And it's
Yeah.
actually about the power that Sharjah has right now for those investors who will risk venturing into an emirate that's less known, but that the return could be a lot higher than if they were to buy property right now in Dubai.
Yeah,
Uh, because obviously Dubai is a lot more expensive.
it is.
This does lead me to my next question, which is going to be about the power of content and the power of marketing. When it comes to content, HubSpot's CEO said the following: what separates good content from great content is a willingness to take risks and to push the envelope. Taking it to a marketing level, what do you think separates good marketing from great marketing?
For me, it's about not be afraid to make choices and sometimes decide that less is more, and to be willing to look at the stories and the customer journey and how you tell those stories across your various customer journeys, and try then to put yourself in a position of your customers or potential customers, and then ask yourself, is there anything in here which is not necessary? And basically just cut out all the bullshit, or cut out all the stuff which is makes you feel good but doesn't really mean anything for potential customers, and be quite ruthless about trimming it down, and giving something which really is of value and really is a nugget of good information, and trust people to appreciate that. And then if they want more, you'll find out. But I think these days it's much easier to overload customers with so much duplication and useless or unnecessary information, that it becomes a lot harder for people to find what it is they're exactly looking for. So keep it simple, keep it transparent. That's what separates it for me.
Okay. And spinning off of that question, companies are expected to spend $120 billion in digital marketing by 2021. A
Mhm.
big chunk of that will obviously be towards social networks. But what do you think the future of marketing will look like, keeping in mind that figure?
Mhm. Well, I mean, I know I'm relatively old school, but for me, things like marketing versus content, or even digital marketing versus, call it, analog marketing or offline marketing, it doesn't exist. For me, it's about what is it you're trying to promote, sell, communicate, to whom is it relevant? And do you then understand how your potential customers or your target audience, how they prefer to consume this kind of information and how they want to be spoken to? How can you best interact with them? And best is in a way which they appreciate, but is also cost effective for you as a company. And that will determine your mix. Full stop. Now, whether that's online, offline, very heavy in content, or not so much, but it for me, starting with the question, should I invest in digital versus non-digital marketing, or invest more in content versus other marketing channels, is irrelevant.
Okay.
You start with the customer, not with your product, not with your service, not with what you think is right. No, you start with your customer, and then you sort of build it from around there. To answer your question, does it surprise me that investments in, let's call it, content and digital marketing will continue to increase? No, because that's how we as customers, consumers, take information to us. That's how we are more used to inform ourselves and purchase or pre-purchase goods or services.
Mhm.
I think the the challenge for companies more and more these days is how to make clear choices about what it is you're going to do and what it is you're going to do first, rather than trying to jump on the bandwagon and try to do everything. Go into all social media channels and do all forms of acquisition marketing, where you might be better off choosing only a few channels and doing them right.
Yeah, definitely. I think it also has a lot to do with A/B testing. Nobody has a secret recipe or a magic ball that can let the company know what's going to work the best. I think it's a lot to do with A/B testing, seeing what channels users are engaging the most with, and at the same time, learning where your users are going to consume content. If it's primarily on the internet, then the most resources should be invested into digital marketing, because that's how your consumers are in, digesting content as well. However, I've worked across print media as well. And the power of print media, there's something about it that just when you have a piece of paper in your hand, a newspaper with a very powerful brand on there, there's a different, it sends a different message at the same time, but it has to be towards the right consumer, because I feel like a lot of millennials aren't going to be appreciating print media as
Mhm.
much as they would appreciate digital media, which is quick, easy, fast, and they can just move on to the next source of information.
No, that's true. But again, that's not always the same for every product, for instance.
Yeah.
So when I was at Lepbrooks, for instance, even though we were speaking to a lot of millennials, we did notice that a lot of the sports pages or free newspapers like Metro, etc., are being read by the millennials. I mean, they won't pay for a newspaper, but that kind of print actually was quite effective. Having said that, I think the role of analog media, if you wish, has changed to the extent that it's more about creating an awareness and a desire to find out more without giving the full information. So, where in the past, maybe analog media was capable of immediately trigger a call to action, I think these days it's much more around creating an interest, which might lead to a follow up, which might lead to a call to action. So there seems to be sort of more steps in between.
Okay, fair enough. We are going to be moving into our set of rapid fire questions, which are basically your recommendations to our audience. So the first
Okay.
question will be a resource or an influencer that inspires you and why.
Well, I recently read a book called Eyes Wide Shut, and it was written already a few years ago. But this is about how, particularly in this day and age, where there's the risk of information overload or the risk of so many so-called experts, and how you, as both as just as a person as well as a professional, you need to be much more critical and asking questions, because it's so hard these days to, or so easy even to be influenced by all the information which comes towards you. But why should you? So it's about weaponizing yourself with the right questions and toolkit to, again, excuse my phrase, cut through the bullshit and ask the right questions and understand what's right for you. So
Okay.
I thought, usually I'm not that keen on, let's call it, guru kind books, but this one really was an eye opener for me. So I can really recommend that.
And it's a book, not the movie, right? Not the movie
Yeah,
I
it's a book.
Got.
No,
It's a
no, no,
book
no,
I
no, 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 no.
Got.
It's not the movie.
I think that's a very important specification to make.
No, no, it's a book.
Okay. What about your favorite app at the moment?
Well, because of COVID and because of being at home quite a lot, I've decided to brush up on my language skills a little bit. So I'm playing around a lot with an app called Drops, or Language Drops. So it allows me to, sort of improve my French and my German, for instance. And the reason I like it so much, because it's not traditional learning; it's sort of gamified learning. So it's just easy to spend 5-10 minutes a day, and it doesn't feel like you're learning. No, you're just having fun with it. So yeah,
I love gamification. Big fan of it.
yes.
Okay, what about a hashtag or an event that you'd like to recommend to our audience? And obviously, it could be a digital event because of coronavirus. We all know that face to face events are quite difficult to have right now.
Yes.
Host.
Don't really have one at the moment, to be honest with you. I mean, for me, the fact that we're coming out of lockdown a little bit, the ability to meet my friends again, for me, is probably the biggest and most important event I can have at the moment, or to go to my parents again. So yeah,
That is
just it's being able to really appreciate human connection. That probably for me is a realization, and if anything good has come out of this, it's an appreciation how important human interaction actually is.
that is such a sweet response. I'm sure your parents and your friends will really appreciate the shout out. But it's also quite a marketeer response as well, because marketing is all about humans and about emotions. So
True.
On that note, we are going to end our interview. Robert, thank you so much for joining us today on the Content Mix. Those were great tips and advice, and I really liked learning about your journey.
Well, thank you so much. Pleasure was all mine. I really enjoyed this.
Awesome. And thank you everyone for listening in. For more perspectives on the content marketing industry in Europe, check out the Content Mix. We'll be releasing interviews just like this one every week. So keep on tuning in and see you next time. Bye.
Bye.